Welcome to the Lost Pages of Norse Myth. I'm Jason Weiser, your narrator and host of the Myths and Legends podcast. Each month, join us here as we reveal a missing page from the Prose Edda, the ancient manuscript containing all of Norse myth. It's whispered that these lost pages tell the story of a mysterious god from a distant land and his young son as they embark on a perilous journey across the Norse realms. I present now the second lost page, Odin and the Knowledge Keeper. Perhaps this one, she thought as she blew the dust from the cover. At long last, perhaps this one will let me see far enough to catch a glimpse of my lost love, my husband. Groa, the seer, inspected the tome that she had just discovered. This was the one she had been hunting for quite some time. Cracking open the tome, she allowed herself a slight smile, knowing that the runes inside held the power to augment her already substantial prophetic talents, and perhaps allow her to, after all this time, glimpse the location of her husband, Arvando. Groa's search for her lost husband had been ongoing now for some time. Already a gifted seer, she hoped to lengthen the scope of her sight by hunting down and collecting tomes of arcane wisdom. She had traversed the realms, hunting for such tomes, each one full of ancient knowledge. And, with each runic passage spoken aloud, her powers of sight did grow, but she never glimpsed what she was truly after, the location of Arvando. The last time Groa had felt her husband's embrace was moments before he journeyed on a quest by the side of Thor, the mighty son of Odin. Arvando had never returned from that quest. All Groa knew was that, after suffering from a bout of frostbite, Thor attempted to carry Arvando home from Vanaheim across a bitter and icy stream in a basket on his back. But somewhere in the tundra, Thor lost Arvando. Thor returned home with only an empty basket. He knew not what fate befell Groa's true love. Although her sought-after prize continued to elude her, Groa did glimpse many things inside each tome. Soon, the search for her husband became a pursuit for knowledge itself, and over the years, Groa had collected her discoveries in an endless library of arcane wisdom. As her powers grew, so did her reputation for prophecy. Even one so powerful as Thor's father, Odin, the All-Father, came to rely on Groa's foresight. Groa didn't know why, but back in the safety of her library, she felt that this latest tome was somehow special. Her prophecies had grown to allow her to see longer and farther than anyone before or since, and she felt this latest tome would surely tip the scales of her talents to allow her to see what she so desperately desired. And now that she held it in her hands, she could crack it open, recite the runic incantations inside, and claim the tome's power for herself. Groa lifted the book's cover and spoke the runic phrases aloud, her voice echoing with lingering hope and divine magic. As she spoke the runes aloud, she shut her eyes tight, her mind flooded with images. But the whereabouts of poor Arvando didn't come with the flood. Instead, Groa grimaced as her mind raced with horrible, disastrous visions. She saw the worlds plunge into a bitter 3-year winter. She saw the sky split, and the realms began to tremble and quake. She saw a horrible terror emerge with a flaming sword, and an enormous, beastly wolf rampaging across the countryside as he grew to consume the very sun. She saw the deadliest of monsters and the worst of gods at each other's throats. And, in the events leading up to it all, she also saw a pale, white ghost from a distant land and his young son, somehow intertwined in this terrible prophecy. Back in Asgard, realm of the Aesir gods, Odin's remaining eye twitched. He felt the ripples of Groa's prophecy come crashing across the realms. Ragnarok, Odin whispered to himself with a tremble, and then, lifting himself from his throne, the All-Father hissed, Groa. Still reeling from the onslaught of her terrible vision, Groa steadied herself against her library walls. She had seen so much, too much, and still, the fate of her beloved Arvando remained a mystery. How can this be? She lamented out loud. were Arvandel's whereabouts so hidden, so secret, that even she who had glimpsed the end of all things was still unable to divine his location? Or did he remain hidden because someone was hiding him? Yes, thought Groa, but what creature would be so ruthless as to cloud her own husband from her sight? Groa didn't have time to wallow in a revelation for long. Moments later, she heard a beckoning call from outside her library's front door. She strained against the heavy door and saw him there. Odin, the Allfather. This was not abnormal. Odin had visited Groa's library many times, seeking her prophetic knowledge. He was most likely here in an attempt to avoid some minor ill fate. Allfather, your presence honors me, Groa started, but now was not the best time. Groa's excuse was cut short, as Odin's hand clasped hard around her throat. The skies darkened with growing gray clouds. He drew her near and demanded, Seer, tell me what you've seen. Odin, Groa stammered. Tell me, said the Allfather, or I shall bash your head in, just like my son Thor did to your beloved Arvandel. Now, Groa understood. In all of her travels, and all her collections of arcane wisdom, the reason she was still yet unable to glimpse the fate of her husband was because Odin had used his enchantments to conceal his death at Thor's hands from her sight. She struggled against Odin's mighty grip, defiant not to tell him of her visions of Ragnarok, or of the strange god from another land. But it mattered not. With a smile, Odin tightened his grip and took Groa's knowledge, her runes, her vast library, and her very life for his own. Welcome to the Lost Pages of Norse Myth. I'm Jason Weiser, your narrator and host of the Myths and Legends podcast. Each month, join us here as we reveal a missing page from the Prose Edda, the great book that contains all of Norse myth. It's whispered that these lost pages tell the story of a god from a distant land and his young son as they embark on a perilous journey across the Norse realms. I present now the third lost page, And Only Rage Remained. The unanswered cries of his terrified child echoed across the winter woods. Tears, falling from the face of this realm's newest widow, poked almost unnoticeable holes in the blood-spattered snow. The man's body lay in a heap at the foot of a great, fallen tree, his head staring back at him from where it landed a dozen yards over, mouth still agape in panic and horror at the bloody consequences for simply crossing the creature's path. And the creature responsible for this nightmarish scene lumbered on, its terrible mind not caring for what it had just wrought in the slightest, not satisfied in the least with its freshest kill, turning, instead, to seek yet another target for its unquenchable rage. There was a name for such creatures in the Nine Realms. Draugr, a twisted horror cursed to wander Midgard with but a single thought, propelling its husk of a body to continue to drag its feet across the Norse wilds. But, like many before him, this Draugr was not born to the violence and anger that it now spread to anyone it encountered. This Draugr once had a life, and a family, and a name. Now, only rage remained. Before the change, the monster had been a man, and he spent his life like most men of his time, fighting for food, refuge, and survival in the Norse wilds. With a small band of others who had been thrust together by necessity, they managed a life. The man attributed it to one simple rule: never yield. No matter how unforgiving the dangers of the woods became, perseverance, through the will of the goddess Freya, was all they needed to make it through. They formed a community. The man had even found love inside his makeshift family and a chance to start a real family of his own. Bringing a baby into such an uncertain world was not easy by any stretch of the imagination, but their small community rallied around the child to help protect and nurture this precious new life. The challenges remained. Thieves and bandits still managed to steal what meager offerings the group had managed to assemble for themselves. Other clans challenged the group's leaders for dominance and tried to break them apart, but their unwillingness to yield to any threat got them through and kept them together. Even faced with uncertain dangers, for a while, times were good. One morning, as the sun illuminated the sky, the shrieks of Odin's ravens on their daily swoop across Midgard woke the man. He roused his loyal group and set off east, through a patch of dark wood near their latest camp. Normally, they would have taken a day's journey around the woods, as heading straight through brought the chance of even more hidden danger. But their drinking horns had already run dry, and scouts had heard the babbling of a brook in the clearing just past the tree. Their thirst would claim them before they made the days-long journey around potential harm. Entering the woods, the man and his warriors kept a sharp look, but the trees were quieted enough that they could hear the babbling brook on the other side. As they continued deeper into the woods, the babbling grew louder. So loud, in fact, it began to seem like laughter. Low, guttural bellows, coming not from the far side of the trees, but from above. The man craned his neck toward the laughter, just as the gang of bandits swiftly descended from their branches. In an instant, they were upon the small group. He had led his clan directly into their trap. The man drew his sword as he faced the largest bandit and growled, "You will not break us." But the bandit was larger, swifter, and more desperate than the man himself. He matched each blow, and the two fought to a standstill. "I will not yield. I will not cease. You cannot win." The man spat through the blood pooling in his mouth. The bandit let out that same slow, low, guttural laugh. "But I already have. Look." With a gesture, the bandit king motioned for the man to turn. He had been so focused on besting the bandit king that he hadn't seen the dozens more bandits crawling from their hiding places in the trees. They had slain his warriors and captured his women and children. As the pounding heartbeat of the battle softened in his ears, he heard the cries of his wife and child as they struggled against the chains of the bandit horde. All seemed lost, but the man's resolve had seen him through worse. As the pure rage welled inside him like a forger's fire, he turned to deliver the final blow and bellowed, but he never got the chance. The odds, at last, were too great. The blade from the bandit king pierced his heart before he took another step. What an odd feeling, the man thought. He felt peaceful, as if he were dreamily slumbering by a warm fire. But wait, something felt off. He was doing something important. Had he been interrupted? Hazy questions swam in his mind. As the Valkyrie approached, he had died a warrior's death, and as such, he was entitled to a warrior's reward. An eternity of battle and feasting in the great halls of Valhalla, in the presence of the All-Father Odin himself. The Valkyries were sent to warriors on their final breath to deliver such rewards and escort the fallen. As the Valkyrie drew closer, the man felt her pull, and he began to yield his claim to the realm of mortal men. As he did, he studied his new companion. Her long, perfectly braided hair, her ornate shield and shining blade. Wait. A blade. The man remembered. The blade of the bandit king was about to pierce his heart. This must be a trick. Some spell of confusion meant to distract him from the battle. He could not be at the foot of his final reward. He could not leave his wife and child on the earthen plane. He could not. He would not yield to the specter. Never yield. He shouted with such ferocity. The Valkyrie actually shifted her balance. As the man forced his heavy body to stand, the Valkyrie remorsefully drew her sword. He lunged at her then, with all the strength and anger that he never had the chance to deliver to the bandit king, and the two locked in combat. The Valkyrie saw that she had no choice but to best this confused, fallen warrior. The man saw only the bandit king. As their swords clashed, their fight grew, hotter and hotter with the power of the Valkyrie and the burning rage of the fallen man. So hot did the conflict become that a ball of pure white flame began to form around the two. The Valkyrie remained unaffected, but the man was just a mortal man. The fire surrounded him, melting the dirt at his feet, causing him to sink into the very earth. The flames stripped away his skin and fused armor to flesh and bone. Blow by blow, the fire burned away the man he was. Gone was his life, his happy days, his wife, his child. Gone now was the man who would never yield. In his place stood a creature of pure warrior's rage, a blight on the realm of men, whose thirst for vengeance would never cease. Where the man once stood, now only a monster of rage, a Draugr, remained. Product not yet rated. Welcome to the Lost Pages of Norse Myth. I'm Jason Weiser, your narrator and host of the Myths and Legends podcast. Each month, join us as we reveal a missing page from the Prose Edda, an ancient tome that contains all of Norse myth. It's whispered that these lost pages tell the story of a god from a distant land and his young son as they embark on a perilous journey across the Norse realms. I present to you now the fourth lost page, the Dead Stonemason. Thor was barely winded as he climbed up the giant's heaving chest. This battle had hardly been won, from his perspective at least. With little effort, the giant was already on his back, staining the snow-covered mountains as blood seeped from his stomach. "One last chance, Jotun," Thor said sadistically. "Reveal the location of your home and leave this place alive." The Aesir, and Thor in particular, seethed with hatred for the giants. He had been seeking to invade Jötunheim for years, and was known to torture the giants that he came across in an effort to elicit the location of their kingdom. "You lie," the giant snapped back at him. "And even if you told the truth, I wouldn't tell you anything." Unfortunately, it seemed that word had gotten around that even those who broke under Thor's pressure, divulging information that surely endangered their families, would not survive. "Very well," the thunder god snarled. He swung his fabled hammer, Mjolnir, and finished the giant off, another casualty in his merciless campaign of destruction. The clanging of the hammer and chisel grew more harried as sunset drew near and the bitter winds of early winter intensified. Brick after flawless brick, the elder giant, Thalmor, kept working, unbothered by the falling darkness. Though none in the Nine Realms surpassed his knowledge of stone and masonry, Thalmor's task of completing a wall to guard Jötunheim remained nigh impossible. Thor's malevolent crusade was nearly at the Jotun's doorstep, but even at this breakneck pace, the master stonemason never sacrificed his product. Thalmor simply continued his work in darkness, calculating the most formidable angles for his bricks, and crafting them with a measured ringing of his venerated hammer and chisel. Constructing massive walls to surround the ornate structures of Jötunheim was the last-ditch effort of his people to protect their precious home. Thalmor knew the responsibility resting on his sore shoulders, but the fuel of peril can only push one so far. Taking just a short break, the elder giant's heavy breathing was loud enough to send colonies of bats scattering into the sky. He looked up at his progress. It was impressive, no doubt, but there was still so much more to do. Weary in body and mind, Thalmor knew the only way to complete the work, but it would mean convincing his son to help, and that was unlikely to go well. Hrimthur was a good son, but the last few years of constant masonry had put a strain on the relationship with his father. The young giant never embraced the craft, and seemed even less inclined as he grew older, whereas it had become an obsession of his father's. Thalmor had already asked his son for help with the wall, but the fact that he even had to ask was disconcerting. The giant's very existence was at stake. Hrimthur may not have refused outright, but he surely wasn't doing much work, instead insisting that he had the heart of a warrior. Each morning, Thalmor would assign Hrimthur a task. Each evening, Thalmor would check in to find not walls, but piles of crushed rock. The boys' endless combat practice was pushing them even farther behind. Enough was enough. Exhausted from the day and night labor, he came down the path near their home to find Hrimthur eating his evening meal outside by the fire. As usual, the boys' work went unfinished. More piles of Thalmor's magnificent bricks, broken. "My son," Thalmor quietly fumed, "your battle fantasies will be the end of us. Tomorrow, you must work on the wall." Hrimthur didn't even look up from his dinner. "You say our time is precious, yet you waste it," he muttered. "Excuse me?" Thalmor asked, though he had heard quite clearly. "You think a wall will stop the Aesir? Finish your wall. When they get through that, they'll still have to get through me." Hrimthur smirked. "Son, hubris is a deceptive beast," Thalmor sighed. "So foolish, inexperienced, arrogant." Thalmor's words were intended to be wise, but he lost control of them as they blended into an incomprehensible ramble. He forfeited his temper, too, as it grew to match his giant size. His lecture of unbridled frustration brewed up into a great storm, dispatching gale-force winds down the mountain range and bending the forested plains of Midgard. The blast uprooted large patches of pine and birch, cracking open the earth and sending fissures of bare soil up the spine of the snow-dusted landscape. Though Hrimthur had trained for battle, he had never seen it. His father's outburst left him frozen, if only for a moment. Strong indeed, Hrimthur's weakness was knowing only one course of action. He landed a mighty strike on Thalmor's jaw. With the crack of its impact, the young giant instantly felt its wrongness. Thalmor was knocked back by the boy's aggression and fell to his own instincts, throttling Hrimthur with his mason's hammer. The force, normally reserved for sculpted stone bricks, sent the boy flying into Thalmor's wall. It came crashing down upon him. The fall of these enormous blocks dispatched a massive wave of shame that washed over Thalmor as he realized what he had done. He rushed to his son, arms outstretched, begging the boy's forgiveness. Hrimthur refused to even acknowledge his father. After dragging himself from the pile of stones, the boy scrambled off into the night. Thalmor wanted to follow him, but his legs would not budge. Paralyzed by utter grief, he shouted and sobbed as his legs seemed to take root in the quickly frosting earth beneath them. Thalmor's emotions eventually receded, and as they did, his legs regained feeling. He began to search for his son. Thalmor scoured Jötunheim, but came up empty-handed. Standing at the unfinished gates of the kingdom, he thought he could make out the colossal silhouette of Hrimthur, far off in the distance of Midgard's forests. Although he knew better than to venture there, especially so late, Thalmor was desperate. He set off alone into the blackness, trying to do right by his son. The giant stonemason lumbered through Midgard's dark and twisted forests. As the night grew colder, snow squeaked beneath his calloused feet, only audible between the despairing calls for his son. His cries carried as far as the cold air coming down the mountain, but they did nothing to locate the young giant. These cries did, however, gain the attention of another one, lurking in the mysterious realm of men, Thor. The thunder god smirked at his sudden luck. Here he was, just steps away from Jötunheim's famed builder, the one entrusted with protecting the realm that Thor sought to conquer. "Mason," Thor bellowed, catching the attention of the elder giant. "Shouldn't you be back in Jötunheim? Perhaps you can show me the way." Thalmor refused to speak to the thunder god and simply nodded in acknowledgement. A choice of certain death, but one that would not reveal just how close Thor was to Jötunheim's unprotected gates. The master stonemason instead gripped his hammer and chisel, readying himself for the battle that he knew he could not win. The brutal conflict raged under the stars, with Thor taking out every last frustration on Thalmor. The giant stonemason held longer than most, but his stamina was waning as the fight drew on. Thalmor's hammer was designed for construction, not combat. The thunder god seized on the Jötun's weariness, striking him with his own legendary hammer. Thalmor went down hard, falling on his own chisel and driving it straight through his skull. Thor, the great destroyer, had laid waste to Jötunheim's great builder, his body pinned to the cracked earth with his own tools. Thor would later boast that he had set it up this way, but the stonemason's corpse was positioned so perfectly that it couldn't have been planned. The massive giant's fall crushed a village known for worshipping the Vanir god Njord. Even better, his bloody body faced the mountains of Jötunheim, serving as an ominous warning to the giants. He hardly even celebrated this good fortune. Still primed with the adrenaline of combat, the vicious god screamed toward the long range of peaks with a clap of thunder. "I will find your home. I will destroy every last one of you." Hrimthur spent the night sobbing in a cave high up in Jötunheim's mountains. When he returned home, his father was nowhere to be found. He frantically asked the giants in the kingdom, but could only glean that Thalmor was seen headed out to Midgard late last night. Hrimthur knew the father must have gone to Midgard to look for him, a perilous journey any time, let alone in the gloom of night. Anxious at this prospect, the young giant set off into the biting winter morning to find his father. The famed stonemason wasn't difficult to find. As he came upon his father's corpse, Hrimthur unleashed a scream that sent a shockwave through the land, shattering the freshly formed ice on Midgard's nearby lakes. His tears cascaded into pools around his father's body, creating new lakes and rivers that snaked around the elder stonemason's corpse in twists and tangles. His mind clouded, eclipsing all else with inescapable grief, and his tears blackened to match. From that day forward, he would cry only the color of a moonless night. Though Thor may have intended it as an ominous warning, the giant saw fit to leave Thalmor's body where it fell. The site became sacred to the Jotun, and other builders began the construction of a temple to protect the great stonemason's chisel, though this measure made the area even more enticing to intruders. Before the temple could be completed, the giants made the final decision to retreat to Jötunheim and beyond, never to be heard from again. But the stonemason's lifeless body remained. Its massive size changed the landscape of Midgard forever, adding another ridge of mountains around Caldera Lake. It lies there to this day, just to the northeast of Tyr's domed temple, an everlasting reminder of Thor's cruelty and the consequence of a son who dares betray his father. Product not yet rated. Welcome to the Lost Pages of Norse Myth. I'm Jason Weiser, your narrator and host of the Myths and Legends podcast. Each month, join me here as we reveal a missing page from the Prose Edda, an ancient manuscript containing all of Norse myth. It's said that these lost pages tell the story of a mysterious god from a distant land and his young son as they embark on a perilous journey across the Norse realms. I present to you now the fifth lost page, the Forging of Leviathan. A lone figure stood before them, tiny in their sight, yet fear coursed through their hearts. He moved too quickly for them to catch, and his sting they knew was mighty. The eldest of the three giants bellowed to the others, "We must flee now, or meet our end." "No, we will stand and fight, brother," yelled back his fellow Jotun. This time, he must be stopped. Before they could act, the cloaked figure flew at them, enraged, and disappeared behind the massive legs of the tallest giant. A thunderous crack erupted as the massive Jotun tumbled to one knee. His other shattered into 100 pieces of broken bone. The giant wailed in pain, his roar echoing through the valley and shaking the trees. The figure taunted them. "You have no chance against Thor, fell creatures, for none can withstand a blow from the thunder god's mighty Mjolnir." He threw back his hood to reveal braided hair and a thick beard. In his hand, a stout hammer, engraved with runes down its short handle, flashed in the sunlight. He leapt forward toward the downed giant, whose head was now low enough to strike. Reaching back, Thor struck the giant squarely across the jaw, sending a hail of enormous gray teeth thudding to the ground. Thor took aim at the giant once more, but this time threw his silver hammer. It whistled, cutting cleanly through the air, flying straight and true toward the giant's head. It struck bluntly at the bridge of his nose. The Jotun's face caved inward, sending sharp bone fragments back into his soft brain, killing him instantly. The giant fell forward in silence, and Mjolnir changed course, soaring back through the air to the hand of its master. The earth shook underfoot with powerful tremors as the remaining Jotun fled, each heavy footstep causing small quakes as their feet slammed into the ground. The Aesir god, Thor, turned with a grim smile and a spark in his eye. Now drunk with power, he gave chase. Untold miles away, deep in an underground cavern in the realm of Svartalheim, two dwarves sat silently at opposite corners of a workshop in disarray. All manner of hammers, tongs, chisels, and weapons hung from the walls, among wooden barrels and iron chests filled with carved trinkets and rare jewels. Empty flagons of ale littered the ground. In the center of the chamber, a great iron anvil and forge stood dark and cold, its fires long extinguished. The thinner of the two dwarves stood up and spoke, his voice frail in the dark. "What have we wrought? What calamity have we unleashed on this world?" The other dwarf, square-jawed and stouter in frame, remained silent, but then smashed his heavy boot on the stone floor, crushing an unusually large spider. "Are you still on about that, Sindri? It's been almost 30 years, and yet you still fret over news of every slain giant." He turned to leave, and then looked back. "Try those goggle eyes of yours, and straighten your spine, Sobbermouth. What's done is done. It's not just Jötunheim. Brock, you know this," Sindri pleaded. "Thor's bloody campaign knows no bounds and no end, and it's our doing." Brock spat in disgust. "The Aesir are the ones who started this, and it was you who kowtowed to the All-Fatter, the One-Eyed King. We are like ants to him. And yet you had to please him, Wagtail. You had to outdo yourself. This weapon, this lightning hammer for the Thunder God, was your idea, born of your pride, but of our making, together," Sindri shot back. "It is our responsibility, this power we've delivered. We must make amends. It is our duty to restore a balance across these lands." Sindri paused, staring into the darkness. "Are you with me, brother?" For weeks, the brothers Huldra studied ancient dwarven tomes and incantations to set their plan in motion. Sparks flew in the darkness as time-worn grinding wheels sharpened ancient tools. Ash-gray coals in the great forge were lit anew and began to glow red, then orange, then yellow-white as Brock's dense muscles worked his wooden bellows. He withdrew a long set of tongs from the oven's fire, swinging a great ball of molten metal onto an immense iron anvil. As he folded the red-hot metal over onto itself, Sindri brought down the heavy hammer in rhythmic time, slowly shaping the metal into the unmistakable head of a great blade. As they worked, the brothers sang a low and somber melody known only to the eldest dwarven smiths. The rhythm of hammer and song helped time pass without heed, but after 2 straight weeks of unbroken labor, Sindri began to wonder what the limits of his brother's endurance might be. It was on this day, the 15th straight since they began their smithing, that a bloated, jet-black spider crept silently from beneath the bench where Brock had earlier crushed its kin. Its long legs skittered across the stone floor, while the fire from the great oven reflected dimly in its 100 sinister eyes. As the brothers finally neared the end of their metalwork, Brock felt a tickle on his leg beneath his thick leather trousers. He knew he must not be swayed by distraction, though he could not help but recall, decades before, as the brothers worked to forge the mighty hammer Mjolnir, 3 times did a menacing gadfly bite Brock in an attempt to derail him from their purpose. The 3rd bite was to his eye, and, blinded by his own blood, Brock momentarily missed the rhythmic flip of his tongs as Sindri hammered. It was enough to deform their careful design. Thereafter, the handle of Mjolnir was foreshortened, a defect never forgiven, but over time forgotten, by the arrogant Aesir gods who received this epic gift. "Not this time," Brock muttered, and again pushed closed his bellows, in time with the singing of Sindri's hammer. Sindri kept his concentration, but looked quizzically at his brother's sudden exclamation. He saw Brock's eyes widen and then glaze over with a white film. Brock had felt a sharp pain on his thigh a moment before. Now, an icy chill numbed his leg, then his torso, and then his heart. Its bitter gift delivered, the spider dropped quickly to the floor, scurrying through an unseen crack in the stone wall. Brock managed one more heave of his wooden bellows before realizing his arms would no longer obey his command. His vision doubled, then blurred, and with weakened knees, he saw the shape of his gangly brother rush forward to catch him as he fell, but it was too late. Sindri caught the full weight of his brother, but his blood had already gone cold. Brock, the master smith, was no more. Sindri plodded forward in the dense forest, his steps melting into the soft green earth underfoot. You could have gone a little easier on the meat pies, my fat friend. He tightened his grip on the thick rope attached to the small wagon behind him. In it, tucked securely under a woolen blanket, patterned with runes, lay the stiff corpse of his brother, Brock, his skin now a sickly, ashen blue. Approaching the shores of a calm, dark lake, he felt the sharp and watchful eyes of the elves of Alfheim, tracking his every step. He was a friend to them, so his only real burden, aside from the sheer weight of his brother's lifeless body, was the not insignificant task of reclaiming Brock's wandering spirit from this place, the mystic Lake of Souls, before it could depart this corporeal realm. Slowly descending from the skies above the trees, hundreds, perhaps thousands, of many-colored orbs of light floated down toward the surface of the lake. These lights, these wisps, were guiding the souls of this world's fallen to their final resting place. As some touched the surface of the water, their light dissipated, creating gentle ripples in the water as they submerged and disappeared, more souls making their way to the other side. Sindri approached the shore of the lake, his brother in tow. Unbinding the blanket, Brock's body was exposed to the cool night air. Sindri stood with unease, wholly unprepared for what was to follow. All he knew was that the dwarven rite of death, a lost ritual that allows dwarvenkind to pass on from their physical form, must be interrupted, lest he lose his brother forever. Lifting Brock's stiffened arm, he carefully removed his brother's leather glove, a sacred implement of every dwarven smith. As he pulled the glove over his own calloused hand, he looked into the sullen face of his brother one last time and began to wade deep into the waters of the lake. Dwarves belong underground, not underwater, Sindri murmured. Then, taking a deep breath, he dove headfirst into the inky black water and disappeared. He swam further and deeper into the lake, where the light of the submerged wisps began to dim in their final descent. Sindri felt drawn toward the light of a pale blue wisp in the distance, which pulsed slowly as he swam toward it. Mesmerized by the blue light before him, Sindri did not notice as a decayed gray hand reached up from below him and locked onto his ankle, and he could not open his mouth to scream. Twisting around, Sindri saw a dimly lit nightmare scene beneath him. The pale hand belonged to a long-dead corpse, still armored and buried waist-deep in the soot-like sands at the lake's bottom. Most of its skin had long since decomposed, or more likely been eaten away by the starving fish and crabs. Long gray strands of hair swayed hypnotically in the water, revealing a sunken, skeletal face and decayed maw half full of rotted teeth, snapping at the chance of fresh prey, which it had no eyes to see. And there were more. Hundreds of partly buried bodies writhed in a sickening dance, flailing their moldering arms in futile fits, driven into frenzy by the rare presence of a living soul and unspoiled flesh. As this sunken horror pulled him closer, Sindri unsheathed his dagger and, in one swift motion, slashed at the hand around his ankle, separating it cleanly from its bony arm. He kicked hard at the face of his ghastly foe, knocking its jaw away into the murky depths and propelling Sindri toward the now bright blue wisp, which he grasped with his gloved hand in a final, desperate act of survival. As he made contact, there was a brilliant explosion of blue light, and a sphere of energy blasted back the encroaching dead, creating a slim path to escape to the surface. Gasping for breath, Sindri emerged, crawling to shore, and spat up thick, black liquid from his lungs. He stood warily, his body trembling in the chill night air. Then an icy, tingling itch crept over his body, as if 1,000 insects had infested his skin. Shivering violently, he felt as if the dead were still clutching and pinching at his body. He brushed away these phantom hands and scratched furiously at his skin and hair, but in vain. He felt no relief. Exhausted, he dropped to his knees, scratching deeply into his soaked flesh until blackness consumed him. He awoke dazed and mustered the energy to crawl toward his wagon, pulling himself up to see Brock's still blue body. He removed his brother's glove and placed his trembling hand on Brock's chest. There, faintly, he believed he could feel a single, slow beat of his brother's heart, and he managed a weak smile. He knew he could never tell Brock of this journey, or share the terror he faced in the Lake of Souls. That will be his burden to bear. Brock woke some days later in his own bed, unaware that he had almost passed from this world. He sat upright and stretched, looking once more into the familiar face of his brother. It was then that he began to notice a persistent twitch on Sindri's face. Two weeks passed, and the brothers stood side by side in the warm torchlight of their workshop. Before them lay their finished creation, their crowning triumph, a long and sturdy axe of incomparable craftsmanship. The curved, dark wood handle granted perfect balance against the arced blade of the weapon, sharpened to the finish of a razor that would never dull, such as the skill of the dwarves. A series of intricately carved staves adorn the head of the axe. Sindri's final touch, to imbue its design with a potent magical power, unmatched in any realm. Brock grunted. What, then, do we call it? Sindri found himself lost in thought. This instrument was born as a mighty foil to the hammer. It will be legend in the hands of an honorable soul. So what is greatest, without equal? And these are 9 known realms. The towering peaks of Jötunheim, the blackest depths of hell, the brightest leaves or deepest roots of the world tree, Yggdrasil, or flights of ravens soaring over Midgard's snow-banked hills. Perhaps the great serpent of Midgard, methinks. Offer Brock, he who dwells beneath the sea. It said its body wraps the world. No greater thing could therefore be. Sindri nodded. Then let this blade find trial in a hero's hallowed hand. Let its aim fly straight and true across these ragged lands. Let its purpose find a place high up and further in. Bring us peace and hope once more. Rise now, Leviathan.
Rated M for mature.
Welcome to the Lost Pages of Norse Myth. I'm Jason Weiser, your narrator and host of the Myths and Legends podcast. Each month, join us here as we reveal a missing page from the Prose Edda, the great book that contains all of Norse myth. It is whispered that these lost pages tell the story of a god from a distant land and his young son as they embark on a perilous journey across the Norse realms. I present to you now the 6th lost page, A Call from the Wilds. Even before he opened his eyes, Atreus knew he wasn't going to like what he saw. For one thing, he was moving. Fast. Carried by something that was rocking his body clumsily back and forth. The sensation was not unlike what he imagined sailing must be like, being thrown this way and that at the whim of the waves. But Atreus had never been sailing. In fact, he had never wandered further than the woods immediately surrounding his home. There, he knew every tree, every path, every inch of the forest. But as he strained to open his eyes, he saw the treetops above him rushing past. He recognized not a one. His eyes opened now. Atreus confirmed that he was not being carried by the waves, but by his father, Kratos, who was rushing him through the unfamiliar wilds at impossible speeds. As Kratos' face came into focus, so did something else. Pain. Sharp, hot, and damp. The boy touched it and felt the warm blood running from the fresh gouge on his arm. Blood, pain, panic, none of this was familiar. Atreus' stirring caught his father's attention, and the god looked down at his son. "Boy," Kratos barked, "look what you have done." Kratos' tone was gruff, short, and full of disappointment. At least that, thought Atreus before he slipped back into unconsciousness, seems familiar. That morning had started like any other. Atreus woke to find his father already gone, off on one of his daily hunting trips. But why claiming an elk for dinner, something Atreus' mother and he sometimes practiced over a matter of hours, took his father from dawn till dusk almost every day, Atreus never understood. Atreus spent the morning sharpening his arrows and his skills. His mother reserved a good part of each morning teaching the boy Elder Futhark, the runic alphabet of her people, and Atreus was a quick study. He could read and write on his own now, but Atreus had yet to experience the true power of the runes firsthand. His mother had only recounted tales of the battling gods, shouting runes aloud to trigger all manner of magical attacks. The boy often fantasized about how exciting it would be to have this edge in a real battle, something his relatively quiet life hadn't remotely given him the opportunity to test. As the sun rose high in the midday sky, Atreus sat in the branches of a nearby tree, listening to the sounds of the forest and allowing his mind to wander. Since he was small, Atreus had displayed an ability, nothing as formidable as his father's vaulted strength, but Atreus' gift was extraordinary just the same. Sometimes the thoughts of others intruded upon his own. He couldn't control it, but often, when animals or other baser beings were in distress, Atreus could hear them inside his head, like eavesdropping on a plane most in Midgard didn't even realize was there. On afternoons such as this, Atreus liked to close his eyes, see how far he could listen, and imagine what adventure might lie in the Norse wilds, past his familiar woods. He listened to the song of the wind blowing through the reeds, and of the trees, heavy and cracking under the building frost. But as he craned his head to attempt to hear even further, something else began to creep at the edges of his mind. A voice, crying out in pain. Atreus sat up in a shot. The voice was as clear as it was desperate. Not a whisper in his ears, but a shout in his mind. The cries were not in the language of his mother's people. They were simpler, more basic and animal than that. And although Atreus didn't understand the words themselves, he did understand their clear intent. An animal was in pain and reaching out to him for help. Atreus knew it was dangerous to wander too far out into the woods. His mother had told him so his entire life. But faced with the choice between ignoring another in pain or risking his own safety and the consequences for disobeying his mother, the boy chose the path he knew in his heart to be one of honor. Atreus wasn't a coddled child by any means. He was, after all, raised in the unforgiving wilds of Midgard. And a boy his age was expected to at least be able to handle himself during an afternoon excursion. So, when Atreus grabbed his bow and quiver and told his mother he was off to practice his aim, she was already immersed in her own warrior's training and thought little of it. His feet crunched the frosted ground as he trotted off in the direction of the pained voice. Running now, he glided and vaulted easily over familiar tree stumps, twisted roots, and jagged rocks, whose position he knew how to navigate as easily as finding his way in his own cabin in the dead of night. The pained cries of whatever poor creature was reaching out to him had grown louder now. Atreus tightened the straps on his quiver and quickened his pace, flying past the woods and trees he knew and towards adventure. Atreus hadn't noticed, but as he ran, he had passed one certain tree adorned with a yellow handprint the size of a woman's hand. The three middlemost fingers of the print were clustered together, with the outside fingers splayed out like wings to resemble a soaring bird. With a call in his mind to guide him, Atreus made his way through unfamiliar terrain, attempting to study the patterns of roots erupting from the ground to use as a makeshift path back home. He imagined himself as one of the fabled gods from his mother's stories, traveling to distant realms on the roots of the great tree, Yggdrasil. He was brave Tyr, mapping the unknown for the good of all the realms. He was mighty Ul, on a hunt for honor and glory. He was lost. Completely and hopelessly lost. So caught up in his imaginings had Atreus been that he had forgotten to keep track of the guiding routes. The woods seemed now to be a repeating maze of indistinguishable trees, rocks, and terrain. Had he taken a left at that last jagged boulder, or... Atreus' growing panic was sharply interrupted by screams of agonizing pain. And something else, something darker, growled at the edges of his mind. The wounded animal was near, and in real peril. Forgetting his own dilemma, Atreus blindly shot forward toward the cries of the beast. And there, in a clearing, he saw it. A doe, the largest Atreus had ever encountered. It lay on the ground, wounded, the matted, blood-stained fur on its chest heaving up and down with struggled breaths. Atreus approached the great animal and inspected its wound. An arrow still jutted out of the beast's neck. Some careless hunter had felled the animal, but neglected to finish his work, leaving the doe to struggle alone. Atreus knelt before the animal and looked her straight in the eye. The doe's pained grunts, which had been constant, eased now. Its eyes contracted in recognition. The one she had been calling had come. "You're safe now. I'm here," Atreus comforted. "You can let go." The animal's breath became quicker and shallower. The doe took a final breath in and then moved no more. Atreus laid his hands on the doe's heart and softly recited the Norse rites of death his mother had taught him. Atreus sighed. As he stood next to the fallen doe, he noticed that the animal's fur was not the only bloody surface. The ground around the animal was also stained red, too much so for a simple arrow wound. In fact, the blood wasn't a pool at all, but a trail leading off into the brush. The trail led Atreus around a bend, and then he understood. The blood did not belong to the doe, but to the hunter, who now lay in pieces at Atreus' feet. Atreus' stomach rolled as he took in the scene in front of him. The doe was one thing, but this death wasn't the clean, purposed result of a hunt. This death was brutal and grotesque. He had always thrilled to his mother's descriptions of the fury of mythical monsters, but the horror that lay before him was almost too much to look at all at once. In the glances the boy allowed himself, the strewn body parts, the unnatural, savage cuts through muscle and bone, the film that was already forming on the pools of blood, all of it burned into Atreus' mind. He never wanted to see anything like this ever again. Atreus' only comfort was the thought that, thankfully, he wasn't here to witness this terrible scene unfold. Atreus held his breath in an attempt to allow the nausea to pass. And that's when he heard something else. Something that had been hidden by the dark forest mere steps from the boy, still breathing. Atreus desperately tried not to look, but his eyes betrayed him. As they rose to the trees beyond the body, Atreus saw them there lurking in the darkness, close enough to reach out and touch. Atreus recognized the creatures from his stories. They were one of his favorites, and also the ones that kept him up the most. There, in the woods, standing and breathing just as heavily as the terrified boy, stood two rotting corpses, heaving, vile, undead creatures of pure rage. Draugrs. Atreus' eyes widened as they met the empty sockets where the larger Draugrs' eyes were supposed to be. The creatures roared and charged. Atreus grasped blindly at his quiver, pulling an arrow but losing his footing in the process. Crashing to the ground, his bow and remaining arrows scattered across the frosted earth. The Draugrs rushed closer. The larger one reached its prey first and plucked Atreus from the ground with both hands. The creature lifted Atreus so that the boy's face met its own. Atreus recoiled. The stench was unbearable, and that was before the Draugr bellowed, spraying particles of rotten teeth and decaying gums over the boy as the monster's half-tongue flayed blindly and horribly, like the death throes of a headless snake. Atreus screamed in terror, shading his eyes and turning away as best he could. His right arm pushed back against the Draugr's face. His left hand still clutched the arrow he had pulled. And in desperation, he stabbed out with it again and again and again. By pure chance, the final stabs managed to pierce the translucent skin over the exposed part of the Draugr's skull, and the arrowhead found the creature's soft brains. Atreus was still screaming and stabbing, even after the Draugr had dropped him to the ground, where it now lay in a heap. The boy needed a moment to catch his breath. The luxury the second Draugr was not about to offer as it lumbered nearer and nearer. Eyes wide in horror, Atreus dared not avert his gaze from the nightmare before him, but managed by feel to reach down and grasp his bow and another arrow. Quickly stringing it, he fired, and the arrow embedded itself directly into the Draugr's shoulder, separating it from the rotted muscle of the creature's arm. If the Draugr noticed the damaged arm, now hanging grotesquely from the tendons of his shoulder, he didn't show it. The arrow did nothing to stop the monster lurching closer to Atreus and raising his blade. Panicked and gasping for breath, Atreus found and strung a third arrow. This time, he pulled the bowstring taut until his arm burned. He released. The arrow flew through the air and exploded against the Draugr's sword, shattering the blade into pieces. "Yes!" Atreus exclaimed. But his celebration was short-lived, as his direct hit had unintended consequences. Quicker than the boy could react, a shard from the Draugr's sword flew through the air and sliced his arm, causing the boy to lose his bow once again. Atreus yelled out in torturous pain, but as the Draugr lurched even closer in for the final kill, Atreus felt not frightened, but angry. Blinding pain turned to white-hot rage as his ears pounded and his vision glazed to pure red. As the creature bellowed with fury, so did Atreus. Two warriors with nothing left but anger and pain. The last thing Atreus saw before the world went black was a ghostly white hand reaching down and grabbed the Draugr by its throat, cutting its tortured scream short. A small, quiet question escaped Atreus' lips before he fell unconscious. "Father?" Father and son were rushing towards home. Kratos saw his son was now awake and slowed his pace, lowering his son to the ground and allowing Atreus to stand and find his legs again. "Your legs carried you here. They can carry you back." "I don't know the way," Atreus blubbered, holding back his tears. Kratos only grunted. "Find it then. It is getting dark." Atreus nodded and trotted forward. As he led his father home, following the twisted tree roots, he grimaced at the still fresh pain on his forearm. His father noticed. "The cut is deep. It will heal, but you will carry it with you." Atreus smirked. "My first battle scar." "It is no trophy," Kratos barked. "It is a reminder. You are lucky a scar is all your carelessness brought you. This world is dangerous." "Not for you," Atreus protested. "Show me. One day you might need me." Kratos considered this for a moment. "I need you today," started the god, as he ushered Atreus to quicken his pace, "to talk less and walk more."
Rated M for mature.
Welcome to the Lost Pages of Norse Myth. I'm Jason Weiser, your narrator and host of the Myths and Legends podcast. Each month, join me here as we reveal a missing page of the Prose Edda, the ancient manuscript that contains all of Norse myth. It's said that these lost pages tell the story of a mysterious god from a distant land and his young son, as they embark on a perilous journey across the Norse realms. I present to you now the 7th lost page, the Sundering of Jötunheim. Inside the enormous hall, a great iron bell rang out, its deafening gong echoing across the immense stone walls of the chamber. Treachery, an impossibly deep voice bellowed, shaking the very ground. We have been deceived. Odin and Tyr stepped backwards from the 6 colossal thrones before them, as the air in the room grew heavy and warm. They shielded their ears from the bell's deafening rings and stepped backward in retreat. The giants erupted from their thrones in unison, intent on capturing or crushing their unwanted guests. Enormous hands descended toward the pair of gods, as Odin and Tyr turned to flee, clearly outmatched by this host of giant foes. A hand with fingers the size of tree trunks reached to grasp the gods, but there was a sudden flash of light as Odin transformed into a silvery hawk and flew deftly between the fingers of the enraged Jotun. Tyr cursed the Allfather's power, for he had no such command of transformation, and was quickly overcome by the Council of Giants. He watched as the hawk grew smaller, then disappeared with a defiant screech through the window high above. Below, Tyr struggled helplessly against the iron grip of the giant. He braced himself for the single squeeze that would snuff out his long life. Breathing deep, perhaps for the last time, he closed his eyes and thought of better days. Years earlier, Tyr, the god of law and justice, stood on a high ridge of land to face a gathering throng of thousands. Before him, in an ordered congregation, stood an army of squat and surly dwarves, a host of erudite elves, and 1,000 stern and hardy men. Crowded among them were many strange beasts of burden, pulling wagon loads of supplies, tools, and, naturally, a healthy stock of drinking horns. Behind the assembly rose 3 colossal giants, standing tall in silence. In a single motion, the giants, carrying enormous tree trunks, slammed their walking sticks into the earth, causing the others to jump, and, in the case of the dwarves, to launch into the air. Tyr, the Uniter, he who summons us, all hail, they shouted in unison. Tyr turned his wizened eyes to each group and smiled, returning a deep bow. He had gathered them for a singular and noble purpose. They had all journeyed far, with the promise of easing travel between the realms forever. Too long had the realms been separated by distance and isolated by solitude. Tyr sought a lasting peace, and he knew that uniting the realms was the only path to achieve it. And to make it so, they must unite to create something magnificent. Each volunteer lent their time, skill, and craftsmanship toward the creation of Tyr's great temple. The giants plucked trees from the valley as if they were pins, and redirected the flow of rivers by dragging their fingers across the earth. The dwarves and men hewed stone from the mountainside by the wagon load, while crystals brought by the elves imbued the earth, stone, wood, and water with their mystical power. The labor lasted many long years, but at last, the Temple of Tyr was complete, a hub of massive stonework in the center of Midgard's great caldera, his gift to the 9 realms as an everlasting symbol of unity. As its power to transport sparked to life, all manner of men, elves, dwarves, and gods passed through the mystic portals of the temple, bringing news of distant lands, trade in goods and services, and always hearty appetites. The mingling of the world's kin filled Tyr with an immense sense of pride. As Tyr stood again on the high ridge overlooking his final creation, the ground shook beneath his feet. He was overtaken by an immense shadow and turned to face the trio of giants. "My brother," one spoke, "our work here's done at long last, but I have yet one favor to ask you in return for our toil." "I will do anything in my power in repayment for your aid, old friend," Tyr said. "Now that the journey to our lands may happen in but the blink of an eye, I implore you to send forth your mighty lord, Odin, so that we may broker a peace between our people. His son's long campaign of destruction and murder of the Jötnar is a bitter poison we choke down day by day. His terror must end. I will speak with the Allfather, good giant. I too wish to see an end to his remorseless rampage. We will see you in your mountaintops before long." With that, the giants departed for their homeland. Indeed, Persuading Odin to agree to broker an accord with the giants came easier than expected. I've been eager to try out your colorful new bridge after all, Odin smiled. By your leave, of course. Tyr knew Odin's beguiling humility to be a thin veneer of grace. It was always wise to look past the charm of Odin's words to find a truer meaning. They traveled hence, through Tyr's portals to Jötunheim together, a land that, to this point, had been closed to Odin, its secrets far out of reach. In time, the two approached the enormous Hall of Giants, and without word, 2 stone doors as tall as the walls of Asgard opened slowly, with a thunderous lurch, revealing a hall larger than any chamber seen since by the eyes of men or gods. They entered with caution. Throughout the hall were great tapestries of art, murals to an ancient history and tributes to fallen heroes. Wooden triptychs adorn the walls and floors, each depicting a mythic story, painted into the wood and carved with intricate runes. We welcome you this day under a banner of truce, All-Father, spoke a booming voice, high above the heads of the 2 gods. But know this, we would just as soon squash you underfoot as hear what you have come to say. For 30 years your demon son Thor has waged a bloody campaign of genocide against our kin. Mountains have been made of their corpses, and our rivers choke with their blood. And yet, still, his father appears in our land to discuss an accord. Odin approached the council. I, too, have come seeking a truce this day, for my heart lays heavy by the deeds of my son. He acted beyond my wishes, and his hammer flies without my consent. I have come to offer a peace. In exchange for what? Questioned the central giant. Some treasure? A few Vanir skulls crushed into powder? Or perhaps our finest giantess to carry home to Asgard? We dare say she would scarcely fit into the bedchambers of even the Aesir's mightiest lord. The surrounding giants snickered at the thought. Odin ignored them and continued. What I seek in exchange carries no earthly cost. Indeed, it's free to give. I come to your land in search of knowledge itself. And at my side stands Tyr, Lord of Justice and Honor, as a trusted agent of my goodwill. Tyr stiffened, bracing himself at this unexpected assignment. He would no sooner vouch for Odin's honor as he would challenge his 8-legged horse to a foot race. Odin continued, I seek not the knowledge held today or wisdom from our past. Instead, I desire foresight. I wish to know the winters to come and perhaps a glimpse into our own future. In exchange, I vow before this council that I will deliver unto you Mjolnir, the very hammer of Thor himself. Only then will you realize peace in these lands. At this, the giants gasped and clamored among themselves. Odin, awaiting this very moment, used this distraction to steal a closer inspection of the tapestries and triptychs in the chamber, for this was the true purpose of his journey. The accord was but a ruse. Odin would never strip Thor of his prized Jotun-slaying hammer. He desperately desired the foresight to see and alter his own doom, and he only needed to get close enough to glimpse it. He was prepared to offer nothing in return. Odin effortlessly set the details of the tapestries and triptychs to memory. The final triptych was the most remarkable, as he had not yet heard this tale foretold. He glimpsed the visage of an untamed warrior, accompanied by his son, traveling towards a mountaintop. Odin was only able to spy this forbidden knowledge for a moment. He had been spotted by one of the council. His ruse had been discovered, and the alarm had already been sounded. Tyr's eyes snapped open. The recollection of his beloved temple and the tale of their journey here seemed like a distant dream. And he looked up now to the face of the giant whose grasp he would not escape. Tyr, hear us now. We know your heart by deed and bond of fellowship, so we spare your life now, on one condition, that you will travel back across your rainbow bridge and return to your temple. There, you will forever seal this passageway to Jötunheim from all the realms. You will sunder the connection to these lands, most of all from Odin, who, forever after, is our sworn enemy. Our race will be recalled from Midgard to live here, sequestered in sacred peace and solitude, until the breaking of the earth. The giant glanced toward the triptychs Odin had spied. Odin came here to seek not knowledge, but a means to end our kind in a foolish bid to outlive his fate. His story is foretold. It will come to pass, as will yours. The giant placed Tyr roughly back on his feet. I stand ashamed of these acts, my brothers. Tyr spoke. I once stood shoulder to shoulder with Jötun in the building of our great shared temple, with a solemn intent to build a bridge, rather than more walls. Yet your request I must respect, and will see to it in haste. My parting wish is to not see your folk pass into legend, but if they do, it will be with honor. And with that, Tyr departed toward the portal in the mountainside, a faint hope lingering in his heart that this would not be the last he'd see of Jötunkind. And high overhead, in the mountain peaks, a silver hawk descended through the treetops and touched upon the ground, returning to his Aesir form. Before stepping back through the safety of the portal, Odin glanced back over his shoulder, a wicked smile forming on his lips.
Rated M for mature.
Welcome to the Lost Pages of Norse Myth. I'm Jason Weiser, your narrator and host of the Myths and Legends podcast. Each month, join us here as we reveal a missing page from the Prose Edda, the great book that contains all of Norse myth. It's whispered that these lost pages tell the story of a god from a distant land and his young son as they embark on a perilous journey across the Norse realms. I present to you now the 8th lost page, the First Great War. His vision blurred in between the blackouts. When he was conscious, his senses were overwhelming. Too much was happening all at once, and it all blended together in fits of pain. All his tortured mind allowed him to process was the loud pop and crackle of the fire as it consumed him, a terrible cacophony overpowered only by the cackling of the Aesir gods, who laughed as his body burned. His name was Freyr, a revered leader of the Vanir. He had traveled to this foreign land as an act of diplomacy. Trying to form a truce, he taught the Aesir the ways of the harvest. He gave these gods abilities beyond their wildest dreams, with spellcraft fit to feed all of Asgard. But such powerful magic always had a downside. And when things went wrong, the denizens of Asgard weren't about to blame themselves. His head nodded back up, and through the smoke he saw Sif, Bragi, and Hodr among the other Aesir gods in the crowd. You brought this upon yourself. One of them chided him. You'll burn among your poisoned crops. He didn't see who was taunting him. It didn't matter. Only days ago, they were willing pupils for his lessons. Now, they could hardly even stay seated, drunk on mead and cheering ever louder as he became engulfed in the flames started by the very crops he had enchanted. Though the pain was great, he knew he would survive. Freyr sighed and finally, mercifully, blacked out. Hours later, he awoke to find himself alone in Odin's hall. The cruel gods of Asgard were likely off somewhere celebrating his supposed demise. So, he crawled from the still burning coals, dusted the ash of the harvest away, and snuck out of Asgard to make his way home. Across the realms in Jötunheim, the Vanir gods were incredulous with anger as they gathered in a seaside longhouse in Jötunheim to discuss what to do next. Odin's cruel gang had tortured and burned their beloved Freyr. Tensions had been simmering between the Vanir and the Aesir since time itself began, but only now were the two sides finally tipping in a real conflict. And so a war of the gods began. The Aesir, Odin, Thor, Hunir, Hodr, Ve, Vili, and all the rest were merciless in their attacks, but traditional too. They fought with weapons and brute force, as physical combat was the only way they knew. The Vanir used more subtle means of magic. Led by Freyr's sister, Freya, their spells undermined the gods of Asgard at every turn. She used Saether magic to confuse their warriors into attacking one another, while Freya reversed his earlier enchantments to truly blight the lands of Asgard. Their father, Njord, channeled his anger into vicious winds that whipped across the sea, causing the Aesir's travel to last nearly twice as long. Skirmishes between these two tribes of gods continued unabated for centuries. Eventually Odin, the proudest and most cruel of all the Aesir, sought to put an end to it. He was sure it could be settled quickly once his forces were in place, So he gathered a massive army and marched them toward Jötunheim, determined to wipe out the Vanir once and for all. Fear and deference cloaked the landscape as they stomped across it, for the King of Gods had never lost a battle, and he surely never would. The massive throng of troops backed up well past the horizon as they descended in multitudes upon the lush gardens and bountiful fields of Jötunheim. Yet, as these soldiers landed, they were curiously falling back 2 steps for every advance they made. "We must end their magic," snarled Thor to his brothers in battle. "It may already be too late," replied Heimdall, with his especially impressive vision focused on the front lines. The Aesir hadn't ever encountered so many Vanir gods casting Sather's spells at once. They were unexpectedly formidable in combat, taking the lives of Odin's soldiers at an alarming rate. The Aesir retreated, trying to minimize their losses after several days of hard-fought battle. With heavy damage done on both sides, the warring gods found themselves, once again, stuck in a stalemate. With Jötunheim and Asgard both ravaged, the 2 stubborn factions saw no way to singular victory. The only thing to consider now left a bitter taste in all of their mouths: compromise. Mimir was considered a great negotiator by all, so he alone was selected as arbiter, and he brokered a rather brilliant deal. Freya, a leader of the Vanir, would be betrothed to Odin, king of the Aesir. Then, surely, the 2 would work together for the good of all the realms. Struck by Freya's beauty, Odin readily agreed. But Freya, the strong-willed high goddess of the Vanir, spat at the thought of the proposed accord. Marry this brute? She wouldn't even entertain the idea. Back in her hall, she sat alone, fuming at the thought of marrying such an awful soul. Odin had tried to destroy her home, her family, everything she loved, not to mention attempting to murder her beloved brother. She couldn't even bear to look at the repugnant one-eyed king, and now she was to spend eternity with him? Beyond that, Freya was a revered leader of her people. What would they do without her? And what would she do without them? Here in Jötunheim, she was in charge. In Asgard, she would be bound to the Allfather's increasingly cruel and bizarre whims. After days of agonizing over the wedding that increasingly appeared to be her fate, she eventually considered her resistance to be a bit selfish. Before her was the rare opportunity to unite the realms. What's more, her people would be better off with a deal in place, and so she acquiesced. Still, Freya swore she would never forgive Mimir for using her as a pawn in his negotiations. Even though the bride managed barely a smile through the entire event, the marriage of Odin and Freya meant peace at long last, and that alone was cause for celebration throughout the realms. The Allfather wasn't one to let the opportunity for a party slip by. At his command, it was an opulent ceremony with days of drinking and feasting that none would soon forget. Odin took in his beautiful new wife, bathed in golden candlelight that refracted off her extravagant Vanir jewelry, framing her face in the warm glow. She looked back at him, and for once, with the promise of peace resting behind his curled smile, he didn't seem too vile. At last, after centuries of war, peace rippled across the realms. At first, their marriage was tolerable. She taught her husband Sather spells, which he took to easily. For a time, Freya felt nothing short of truly blessed. Though she missed Jötunheim, she was bestowed with new purpose and felt that her home was here now. However, as she became more content, her new husband only grew less so. The High Vanir goddess went back and forth with herself. Was she expecting too much from Odin? His interest in her waned daily. Perhaps the god of gods was too busy in his grand pursuit of knowledge, but he was also chasing gossip, becoming increasingly paranoid and fixated on the destruction of the giants. Every day, they became further and further estranged. Still, things had been worse before. She could suffer a loveless marriage if it made for peace across the realms. Eventually, Freya resigned that she and the Allfather would simply live separate lives, as she quieted herself in the face of his descent toward madness. The One-Eyed King was infatuated, to say the least, with Ragnarok, the apocalyptic battle said to end the world. You're ridiculous. Freya would taunt him with her honesty, but even Odin's friends and followers laughed at him when he would talk about the great impending Twilight War. Of course, all the gods knew that the end would come eventually, and, indeed, embraced this certainty. But the conventional wisdom was that Ragnarok was a long ways off. Nevertheless, Odin was manic in his insistence that the end was nigh. He claimed that if he could destroy all of Jötunheim, he could stop the apocalypse. So obsessed was Odin with the destruction of the Jötnar that he decided that conventional means of warfare were simply not enough. He employed the talents of the greatest smiths in the land, the brothers Brock and Sindri, to create for him a weapon of unimaginable destructive power. When it was finished, Odin bestowed the mighty hammer Mjolnir to his son Thor and sent him out to slay every giant he could find. Thor accepted this task with glee, finding Jotun wherever they would roam, interrogating them to locate the entrance to their kingdom, and murdering them, whether they gave up information or not. This genocide was too much for Freya to bear. She could no longer hold her tongue and blade, while her husband exterminated an entire race. She fought back, vowing to leave her husband and return to Valheim, even if it meant imminent war. But more aberrant than ever, Odin wasn't about to let her have her way. No stranger to sneaking out of the Aesir kingdom, Freya had nearly reached Asgard's high gates when Odin interrupted her. His voice bellowed, echoing off the protective walls. "Freya, this betrayal aches. We could have saved the realms together. I'll curse you so your spirit breaks and banish you betwixt forever. Please, don't." Freya attempted to plead to her husband's more tender nature, but it, like his sanity, was lost. Odin swiftly cut her off. "To never make harm by your hand, or visit this most holy plain. Forget your home, that lush green land. Finished is your reign." The Allfather, eyes flaming, loomed above her. She stammered, gasping for air and making every effort to counter with an incantation of her own, but she just couldn't grasp the words. Long ago, when their marriage seemed to have hope, Freya had taught him the ways of Sather. Back then, Odin laughed it off as a lark. Though he was skilled in it, his interest appeared to be solely for patronizing her. The other Aesir gods made fun of him even for that, as magic was considered a less than manly pursuit. Only now was it apparent. Odin had mastered the craft and kept it secret. Now, instead of casting spells, Freya was feeling their twisted effects. Her vision was blurring fast. She stumbled as the nausea set in. She felt warm and tired, and then it all went black. Freya awoke to find herself cast from the realm of Asgard, distraught at this severe penalty. Now, she would never be able to return to the realm of the Aesir gods, or even raise a hand in defense if harm should befall her. And then it hit her. The sadness was rapidly replaced with horror as she realized what would happen next. With Odin more deranged than ever, war would surely return between the Vanir and Aesir. Mimir's great negotiation had fallen apart when the Aesir were even more powerful than ever, thanks to the gift of the masterwork hammer from Brock and Sindri. The end of her doomed marriage might indeed mean the end of her people. With her decades of sacrifice all for naught, one thing was certain. Freya had failed to stop the madness of Odin and the Aesir. Her only hope was that, in time, some brave soul would finish what she could not, restoring balance and peace to the realms.
Rated M for mature.
Welcome to the Lost Pages of Norse Myth. I'm Jason Weiser, your narrator and host of the Myths and Legends podcast. Each month, join us here as we reveal a missing page from the Prose Edda, the great book that contains all of Norse myth. It is whispered that these lost pages tell the story of a god from a distant land and his young son as they embark on a perilous journey across the Norse realms. But before we begin, I have an exciting announcement for God of War fans and collectors alike. Sony Interactive Entertainment and Santa Monica Studio have partnered with Loot Crate to create the God of War limited edition crate. It's packed with exclusive collectibles and more to take you deeper into the rich world of God of War. Check it out at Loot Crate's website. Pre-order before May 31st, 2018, and you'll also receive a bonus challenge coin keychain. Supplies are limited, so pre-order today at lootcrate.com/God of War. Restrictions apply. Now back to your regularly scheduled epic adventure. Now I present to you the 9th Lost Page, An Eye for an Eye. Dawn was breaking in Asgard, as it had done for 729 mornings past. The sun rose to reveal the realm of the Aesir gods, suffocated by a long, bitter winter. And Asgard huddled and cowering against a fear only uttered in the most desperate, mead-fueled confessions that this might not just be a winter, but the winter. The Fimbulwinter, an unrelenting 3-year frost, said to hearken the arrival of Ragnarok, an end to warmth and hope before the end of the world. It had been almost 2 years since the gods of Asgard saw a sign of spring. With every white new day, they worried that the foretold death of all gods was creeping near. The Aesir knew the manner in which they were going to die. It was the reason they filled their days with fighting, feasting, and drinking. Those were the pleasures of the gods. They meant to enjoy them until the very end. Of course, if this winter lasted any longer, it surely meant that the gods' raucous hedonism had finally come to its final hour. Their fates, they feared, were sealed. As they had done every morning since this great winter had begun, Odin's network of all-seeing ravens circled the skies of the 9 realms. Their wings carried the All-Father's sight across the entirety of creation. Through them, Odin searched unyieldingly for even the smallest glimmer of hope, at an end to this frozen death march, for proof that this winter was not what they feared, that it was nothing more than an inconvenience. And that morning, he found it, poking through the frozen, cracked soil of Midgard, a single flower. Odin's son, Thor, approached his father's throne. The Aesir yet live, as do the Vanir and the cursed giants. Finally, said the All-Father, madness shining in his eye, I can continue my hunt. Spring had come at last, and all Asgard was celebrating, all save their king, who paced furiously in his throne room. The 2-year winter had rattled all the gods, but where most saw the stretches of false alarm, Odin saw it as a clear warning. Next time, the winter would not yield. The next layer of frost on the green pastures of Asgard could only serve as an entryway for the end of all the Aesir knew. Ragnarok was surely upon them. If he did not act now, it would be too late to stop it. The giants have retreated to Jötunheim, but they hold the key to our undoing. Of this I am certain, proclaimed the one-eyed king to the raven perched atop his shoulder. The bird cocked his head at his master quizzically, as if trying to understand if Odin expected a clever avian retort. Odin scoffed. To find our salvation, I must find the hole the coward Jötnar have crawled into. Odin knew that this was a feat that even he, with his all-seeing network of ravens, could not accomplish on his own, so he employed the help of the warriors of the realms. Wandering souls, looking for a chance to prove their worth, began to conveniently find their hero's path in the writings Odin himself had scattered across the realms. Of course, Odin hid his involvement in their creation from the travelers, leading to a test of worth. The writings would then reveal the warrior's true calling, to find the legendary lost realm of Jötunheim. They would then live out the rest of their lives scouring the realms for information on the hidden entrance to the land of the giants, sharing whatever they find with their worthy kin via messenger ravens in a language known only to other true travelers. True, it filled their hearts to live a life with purpose. Of course, not a one knew the truth of their purpose: to fuel the obsession of an all-powerful madman. Year after year, Odin's search continued, but no matter how many giants he sent Thor to torture, no matter how many lost warriors he had at his disposal, he still could not glean the location of the missing path to Jötunheim. His madness had grown beyond his control. In his unyielding quest to find Jötunheim, he was destroying the 9 realms. Mimir, the one who had brokered the deal that had brought peace between the 2 warring factions of gods years before, stepped up to attempt to quell the violence. The ways of death and destruction weren't succeeding, Mimir argued. Ragnarok will be the end of us all. The Jötnar will feast their last as well. If they know something of the end we do not, let us make peace with them, so they might share this knowledge with us. Odin spat. You sound like Tyr, and you'll remember what I did to him in his precious temple. Mimir did remember. Tyr, the god of law and justice, whose temple in the center of the realms allowed all manner of creature to travel to any of the 9 realms in but a moment. But when the giants retreated, an enraged Odin led an army of gods and monsters to raze Tyr's temple. On that day, the very symbol of cooperation and peace between the realms became a declaration of war. The message from Odin to the giants was clear. I do not aim to fight you. I aim to erase you. Talk of Tyr angered Odin even more. Tyr was in league with the rotten Jötnar. He spouted talk of shared knowledge too often as well, thinking I did not see his true intentions. He wanted me to invite the giants to sit at my table. Oh yes, great builders, come in, feast your fill, and please do share your sacred findings out of the goodness of your heart. More likely they would crush me with them. I meant no disrespect, my lord. Mimir started to backtrack, but Odin's rant did not cease. And now here you are, speaking to of peace and cooperation with an enemy that would sooner grind our bones in their teeth. But you know that all too well, eh, Mimir? In fact, being such a friend to the giants, you must know everything. With that, Mimir was momentarily blinded by a flash of light as Odin transformed into a giant silver hawk. He grabbed Mimir with his massive talons, dropping the god high atop the tallest peak in the realm of men, the site of the last known working bridge to Jötunheim. Convinced Mimir had betrayed him for the giants, Odin was sure that his once trusted friend knew the secret rune that would unlock this final gate to their realm. The rune. Speak it, Odin commanded, but Mimir could not. He didn't know it. He pleaded with the Allfather for mercy, but the crazed god simply laughed. You'll say it, eventually. Odin raised his hands. At his command, fat, twisting roots rumbled and burrowed the way out from the earth, and rose, twisting around Mimir. The god of knowledge struggled in vain as the earthen shackles snaked and tightened, binding him to a nearby tree. I've never thanked you, Mimir, Odin taunted with false kindness, for the foresight you so generously granted me, and at such a reasonable price. At this, Odin's fingers reached to his eye patch and lifted it, revealing the calloused, empty socket where his right eye used to reside. But still, I wonder, was I charged fairly? Or did your Jötnar masters simply desire proof of my gullible foolishness? Mimir straightened himself on the tree. I swear, I am not hiding this room from you. I cannot reveal that which I do not know. We shall see. Odin shrugged, raising his hand to show Mimir as it morphed into a razor-sharp talon. You, maybe not as well as you'd like. Odin plunged his talon into Mimir's right eye, stealing it as he felt his had been taken from him. Holding the eye in what was once again a hand, Odin admired it and grimaced when he noticed it was softly glowing. Placing the eye in his pocket, the Allfather turned toward his captive. That's enough for today, he said. We'll try again tomorrow. This will take some time, I'm sure. Luckily for me, I have until the end of the world.